it gets better after high school. Normally, that's what people tell you most of the time. But if you've been horribly bullied and you had a really awful time in high school, especially socially speaking in general, you've just struggled socially your entire life like I have, the harsh truth that you'll realize is that, it does not necessarily get better after high school. The thing is that I wouldn't even really say it gets worse either. It can get better, it can get worse, but for me, the only thing I would say is that it gets complicated. That's it. It simply just gets more complicated because if you really think about it, the social dynamics that you'll observe throughout high school are you will continue to see them throughout the rest of your life. It's just that they will present themselves in more complicated ways. Hence why I said that it gets more complicated. That's really all it is. And the thing is that most of the people who tell you that it gets better after high school, most of them are people who have never really suffered that badly. They were never bullied. They had an okay time in high school or even outright very good time. And they had an even better time after high school, which is why they say that it gets better. But the thing is that once you've been off, only after you've been horribly mistreated by people will you truly understand how the world really works. And you will truly understand that the world is a fundamentally cruel place and good just exists within and under it. That's it. So that things don't just completely fall apart. But good people do not lead this world, evil people do. And you will continue to observe this as life goes on, because I think people think that just because people get more mature after high school, that means that things automatically necessarily get better. And the thing is that it can mean that, sure, but I don't think it's that it gets better after high school. I think it's just that the same social dynamics that you observe throughout high school, they will just present themselves in more, you know, ways that are not as overt as they were in high school. Bullying will continue throughout the rest of your life. And if we're being honest, unless you change drastically, it will probably continue, sadly, because it will continue to show in different forms. That's it. Because a workplace bully will bully you in a different way than a high school bully would, but still that social dynamic is still there. Somebody who is antisocial picks on somebody who is vulnerable. That kind of dynamic will continue to be seen and observed throughout the rest of your life. The popular kids who bring home trophies for the school and everything because they play sports can get away with bullying the quiet kid who nobody likes. That's all there is to it. And you will continue to see this throughout the rest of your life. That's just how it is, because people are fundamentally consumers. They need to take. When they see somebody who is easy to take from, they will continue to take from that person. And it has nothing even really to do with being in high school or not. In high school, it will just be so much more, as I said, it will be a lot more overt because people in high school are immature. But people getting more mature as life goes on doesn't necessarily mean that it gets harder and harder to see. It's just simply, or impossible to see. It just means that it just happens a lot less frequently and not as often as you think it will. And it won't be as in your face about it as it was in high school. That's all it really means. But for me, I'm in my 20s now. I'm 4 years out of high school at this point, and I wouldn't say things are the same or just as bad or worse. I would say that I guess it's not as bad as it was in high school, but that's not a very high bar anyway. But that's not because things have gotten better. It's just that things have not gotten worse. I've just not been in the place where I've just been surrounded by it. I'm not, constantly around awful influences, and awful influences are just not constantly present around me anymore. That's the reason why I'm not suffering as badly anymore. I'm just left to myself to do my own thing. It's not like I have to go to a place regularly where awful people are just present, right? As it was back then. But that's the thing about, you know, being in your 20s, is that, yeah, you have more freedom now. It's that you are able to determine your own path now. But it just means that, the hardships that you encounter, the awful people that you will encounter, you will still very much encounter those people, but you will encounter them not only in different forms, as I mentioned, but a bit less often, less frequently, all of that. But it doesn't necessarily get better in the sense that uh, it will be the complete opposite. People mistreat you off horribly. Everybody looks down on you, but now people suddenly respect you. Everything is okay. It's not really that simple in that kind of sense. You will continue to observe, like I said, the same social dynamics from back then throughout the rest of your life. People will still try to, especially if you don't change drastically. If you change drastically, you become very different, you become a lot more attractive, your physique is better, you make money, all of that, then things will change. Because for me, in the years after high school, I don't get bullied anymore. It's been 4 years since I was last bullied. In my final year of high school, it was by a teacher actually. But the thing is that now, of course, I don't get bullied anymore. But like I said, that's only because I'm just doing my own thing to myself. But a lot of that is because I have been kind of improving myself a bit, very much desperately, because of how horribly I was bullied. So as a result, people have kind of seen that. They can tell that I go to the gym and everything. So people do kind of respect me a little bit more these days. But regardless, I know that I will still encounter more cruel people. I know that it's not going to end anytime soon. And the damage has already been dealt. My entire developmental years were spent with unhealthy social experiences, and people are going to talk about moving on and letting go and all of this. But the truth is, when your entire formative years are marred by just awful experiences, by abusive experiences, you basically don't learn anything at all you learn is just how to repel yourself from everything. And I'm at a point now where my social skills are still awful, because did not have any good experiences at all. I explained this in my first video, but it's either I was just horribly bullied constantly and beaten down, given a reason to avoid people, or I had to spend too much time online because of the pandemic. And as a result, I didn't gain any proper social experiences or social awareness, and I'm still extremely socially stunted. People still get pissed off at me because I say things that apparently I'm not supposed to, even when I'm trying to be nice, etc., things like that. And these things will still continue throughout the rest of your life. And for me, it's incredibly difficult, because I mentioned this in a few videos. I've suspected before that I might be on the spectrum a little bit. And I'm not one of those people that can't pay attention to a 10-minute video and now goes around saying I have ADHD. I'm not like that. But I specifically think that I might be on the autism spectrum, because I've always struggled socially. But not only because of that, I also have a lot of tics as well, and compulsions, rocking back and forth, and the need to touch things and rearrange things in a certain order, manner, all of that. I've just never felt like I was normal. I've always felt like I'm pushing against an invisible wall of some kind, an invisible barrier of some kind. And for me, the thing is though, is that I think it's possible that I might be high functioning autistic. Maybe it's possible I might not even be autistic, but I just think the spectrum is complicated. There's all kinds of sub-diagnoses. Maybe I might be one of those. It's extremely complicated, but I think that there's something going on. I don't buy the fact that I am neurotypical. There's no way I'm neurotypical. I don't buy the fact that I'm completely normal. And in case you're wondering, I have spoken to a doctor about this. I do not have a diagnosis, and I'm not trying to self-diagnose. I'm just saying I suspect it. But I have spoken to a doctor, and I presented all my reasons. I wrote down all my reasonings why, and I told the doctor everything. And even the doctor, after hearing everything, she even said that, yeah, she thinks maybe it would be a good idea to pursue a diagnosis, because she thinks something's going on. And I don't take that as meaning that I do have a diagnosis, because, oh, look, this doctor said this. I know that diagnoses are incredibly complicated. It's not, and a very lengthy process. It's not something that you can just look at some symptoms and say, yeah, it sounds like it. It's way more complicated than that. There's so many tests they have to go through. And like I said, it is a spectrum, so they have to see exactly where you fit on that spectrum. It's very complicated. But the fact that even a doctor did say that she seems like something's going on, it does kind of make you think a little bit, right? But the thing is that I live in Canada. The healthcare system is so annoying here, and because of free healthcare. And I'm not one of those people that says that you necessarily have to privatize it, but I mean, as a result, there are incredibly long wait lines. It's an extremely tedious process. If you need to get diagnosed with anything, it's very tedious. Too many holes you have to jump through, right? Hoops you have to jump through, rather. Not holes. Well, I don't know why I said that, but yeah, it's just a lengthy process. It's very expensive too. And my parents, they of course think I'm perfectly fine, and so they're not helping me with the process. So I'm probably just not going to go through with it because of how tedious it is, and I have other things to focus on anyway. And I'm not trying to look for excuses for anything. I'm still obviously going to keep trying, but it does make you wonder, because it's insane how mistreated I've been my entire life. It's not, I'm making this video talking about high school. It's not just the fact that I was an outcast or alone in high school. I was an outcast among outcasts. I watched this video which you guys have probably heard of. It's a famous video. It got over 20 million views. It's from Vice. It's that one video where this guy sends an attractive lookalike to his high school reunions. This video was from, I think, 2019. He sends an attractive lookalike to his high school reunion, and he basically did it because he felt as though he was invisible in high school. He felt as though he was underappreciated. He was an outcast, things like that. And apparently, even according to some of his classmates, he was picked on. But the thing is, though, is that he still played for the band at his school. There was this inside joke surrounding him, which they also played off of in the video. And at the reunion, it ended up turning out that his classmates were so excited to see him that not only were the popular students excited to speak to him, but it's also the fact that the attractive lookalike, they were able to tell that the attractive lookalike was not him, even though 10 years had passed by. For all they knew, it could have been him. Why not? But they knew it wasn't him, and they were actually upset because they badly wanted to speak to him, and they were so excited when he himself actually walked in, because when he saw how willing people was to speak to him, he eventually decided to go into the reunion himself. And the thing is that even on the way to the reunion, when he was walking, somebody recognized him. That's how well liked he was. And I'm not trying to discredit his experiences, because maybe he was picked on too, he was bullied too, but I mean, he was still well liked by people. For me, I even got bullied by my teachers, for God's sake. Imagine getting multiple of them. I have to go through exact specific incidents, but I cannot really go into that right now in this just one video. I'd have to take several videos to talk about everything, and I will in due time. But for me, my teachers even publicly shamed me in front of the students multiple times because I got bullied so horribly. I also got physically bullied too. One of the incidents of physical bullying led to the police getting involved in my final year, and I had to speak to a detective after school multiple times. I also started developing severe depression, which I still deal with to this day. Not nearly as badly, because I've learned some tools and strategies to manage it by now. But back then, obviously, being a teenager was incredibly bad, and I just suffered and nothing else. I had to do CBT and everything. I started taking medication, and the medication caused me nothing but negative side effects. So as a result, my grades were struggling, hence why my teachers treated me the way that they did, and they didn't even give me a chance to explain all of this while I was in high school. And I was rejected. I did make some friends, but they turned out to not really actually care about me, because I know people are going to tell me, oh, you're an outcast because you don't try. I mean, you can say that if you want, but I did try. I've mentioned this in a few other videos, and in my first video as well, where I talk more about loneliness. I did try. I've always tried. I joined clubs. I did everything, but it's just that, like I mentioned with the whole spectrum thing, I was always different from everybody else. So once people took more time to actually get to know me, that's when they rejected me harshly. That's how it always was. And yeah, that's just how it is, because I mentioned being on the spectrum and being maybe high functioning. The hard part about being high functioning, which I've seen many people say, is that, if you're high functioning, you're too normal for the autistic world, and you're too autistic for the normal world, basically. Did I say that right? Too normal for the autistic world, too autistic for the normal world. Yeah, because you're kind of just in the middle, right? You are not somebody who's so severely impacted by being on the spectrum to the point where you literally cannot even provide for yourself, and therefore you are not technically needed in special education courses, but you are still impacted enough that you are also not able to fit into a normal classroom environment. Because I don't think I was ever suited for a normal classroom environment. I think I always needed some kind of other special accommodations that I never really got, because people looked at me and they saw that, yeah, I still did well in school. I still got honor roll. I was still able to make at least some friends. I was still able to show up and get my homework done and everything. So they thought I was normal. But then there were those other kind of discrepancies, and people saw that and thought, wait, but how come he's talking like this? And how come he rocks back and forth and he does all of that? Well, whatever. He's probably just simply weird. That's it. He's just weird. He's not like everybody else. Or, oh, he's struggling in this area. He's just incompetent. Simple as that. Because that's the thing. If you are really severely kind of mentally challenged or disabled, then maybe at that point you can be given special help, because there is very clearly an issue with you. But if you do not have anything where there is very clearly an issue, but there is obviously an issue, at least to some extent, people are just going to assume that there's not enough of a discrepancy. They're going to see, well, yeah, he's mostly normal, though he's still doing well in his classes. He must just be weird or incompetent in that area. And that's the hard part, because I bring all this up to say that I was never given any proper support at all. And as a result, I'm still struggling to this day, because I still wonder, what exactly is it that makes me so awful in the eyes of other people. Even though I think I'm honest, I tell the truth, I try to look after other people. I consider myself to be an empathetic person, but people just find a way to get upset with me. But I've learned now that just says more about them than it ever does about you. And ultimately, I think I'm a person who has a lot to give, and naturally when other people who do not have anything inside them to give see a person like that, they just naturally feel the need to take. But this is exactly my point. This kind of thing, this kind of dynamic is not going to end in high school, and you will continue to observe this kind of dynamic for the rest of your life, because I don't really agree with this kind of mentality that, oh, it gets better, because I'm gonna tell you a harsh truth right now. It can get worse. I know I'm not supposed to say that. I'm a content creator. I'm supposed to be sitting up here and telling you some motivational speech. You gotta get up and you gotta do it every day. I gotta say stuff like that. But I find that it's easier to just tell the truth, honestly, than to have to say what you think people would want to say. Because at this point, nothing I do is ever good enough. So I'm just going to say the truth. Whoever benefits from it benefits. Whoever doesn't. But the thing is that, it can always get worse, and you will observe this many times that it can very much get worse if you just depend on things to get better. If you just hope that things get better, then very much there's nothing that says that it will. Hope in general to me is a waste of time. I think you really do have to create the path that you want. And like I said, it's harder to observe those incidents that you observe throughout the rest of your life. That I said, it might be less common than it was back when you were younger, but it will still very much be there. You should never ever hope that life is just going to get better for you. I think that's the main takeaway from today's video. If you can take anything away from it, create the life that you want, because it can always get worse. Build the strength that you want. It will only actually get better. Whether it gets better or not depends on the strength that you build, the choices that you make, and the path that you set for yourself, because it very much can always get worse. I don't believe in rock bottom. After being on antidepressants and getting bullied by teachers and having to speak to the detectives and everything, I don't believe in rock bottom anymore. I truly believe that it can get worse. And I know that there are people who have suffered even more than me. I know it can always get worse. But what I like to tell myself is that, you don't hit the bottom of the pit. You keep falling down a bottomless pit unless you decide to catch yourself on the sides and crawl your way up from there. You just have to keep crawling, and you have to find your way out. And whether or not it gets better depends entirely on that fact. So, thanks for watching.